Welcome to your custom deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of analytical sources to unpack, well, frankly, one of the most baffling legal double standards in the United States government.
Yeah, it really is baffling. And we're going to get into the exact mechanics of it today.
Right, so our mission is to figure out how two different sets of federal employees can do the exact same thing with the exact same information and face entirely different realities in the eyes of the law.
It is a stark contrast for sure.
To really understand this, I want you to picture two distinct scenes drawn straight from our research. So, scene A United States senator is sitting in a highly classified, closed-door intelligence committee briefing.
A briefing with documents the public will not see for months, if ever.
Exactly. And they learn, unequivocally, that a major geopolitical conflict is about to break out. A war. The briefing ends. The senator walks out into the hallway, pulls out their phone, calls their broker, and orders them to sell off millions in airline stocks.
Just casually making that call.
Right. And a few weeks later, the war starts, the market tanks, and the senator's fortune is completely protected. Their penalty for doing this. At the very worst, a $200 fine.
Which, when you are managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio, is barely a rounding error. It certainly isn't a deterrent.
Not at all. So keep that in your head, because here's scene B. A colonel at the Pentagon, a high-ranking military official, receives that exact same classified briefing. He drives home, walks into his kitchen, and tells his wife, "We need to sell our entire portfolio right now because things are about to get incredibly ugly."
So he does the exact same thing the senator did.
He does. But his penalty? Handcuffs, federal charges for insider trading, and a one-way ticket to federal prison.
It sounds like a fabricated hypothetical, but the documentation shows it as an absolute jurisdictional reality.
It really gets your blood pressure up, doesn't it?
Oh, if you are listening to this right now and feeling your blood pressure start to rise, your reaction is entirely justified. This isn't some obscure loophole. We are looking at deeply entrenched laws that govern how power and money interact in Washington.
It's wild.
It is. But before we get into the mechanics of those laws, we should set a quick ground rule for our discussion. We are going to be naming specific legislation, specific political figures, and specific acts today, just as they are outlined in our source material.
Yeah, we have to be clear about that.
Right. But we are doing this strictly to report the facts impartially. We aren't taking political sides here. We are simply dissecting the legal mechanics that make these contrasting scenes possible.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how scene A, the untouchable senator, is legally possible, we have to rewind the clock to a law that was supposedly designed to fix this problem over a decade ago.
Yeah, we need to look closely at the year 2012 and the passage of the SD-SOC Act.
The Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act.
Exactly. Because prior to 2012, there actually wasn't an explicit law forbidding members of Congress from trading on inside information. Public pressure eventually reached a boiling point, forcing Congress to act. And, the public relations campaign surrounding the Stable Act framed it as a complete ban on congressional insider trading.
I remember the massive victory lap Washington took on that. It was marketed to the American public as the ultimate ethical house cleaning.
Oh, absolutely.
But reading through the source material, the fine print tells a wildly different story. The core mechanism of the law didn't actually strip lawmakers of their ability to trade individual stocks.
No, it didn't.
It merely required them to report those trades.
Exactly. The delayed receipt system is exactly why that 2012 public victory lap was so misleading. Under the Stay-So Act, lawmakers aren't forbidden from making a trade based on what they hear in a committee room.
Right.
They simply have an obligation to disclose that trade to the public up to 45 days after the transaction is completed.
This honestly blew my mind when I was reading the breakdown. I mean, this is like a diet where the only rule is you have to write down that you ate an entire chocolate cake 45 days later.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Right. It doesn't stop you from eating the cake. You still get all the calories, or in this specific context, all the financial profits.
Yeah, and the enforcement mechanisms make that analogy look generous. Let's look at what happens when a lawmaker simply forgets to report a trade.
Oh, you mean like buying a massive block of pharmaceutical stock right before that same company receives a billion-dollar government grant?
Precisely. What is the actual consequence for violating that 45-day reporting rule?
They get hit with a $200 fine. It's utterly absurd.
It really is.
You can't even get a decent dinner in Washington, D.C. for $200. It practically treats high-level financial corruption like a minor parking ticket.
Right, the system is essentially charging a tiny administrative fee for the privilege of trading in the dark. What's fascinating here is the distinction the legal system makes between a conflict of interest and actual insider trading.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, a conflict of interest might look terrible to the public, but it's not inherently illegal under the Stock Act framework.
Right. Our source material highlights a very specific recent example of this mechanism at work.
Yeah. During the debates and votes on massive multi-billion-dollar aid budgets for Ukraine and Israel, at least 25 members of national security committees were actively buying stock in defense contractors.
Companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman.
The very companies manufacturing the weapons systems those committees were funding.
It's just staggering. These lawmakers are sitting in rooms directly influencing the flow of billions of taxpayer dollars to the defense sector.
And simultaneously buying stock in the company's position to absorb that cash.
And the stocks, predictably, surged. But the justice system looks at that scenario and determines it cannot conclusively prove intent.
Right, because they need a smoking gun. Unless a prosecutor finds an email where a lawmaker explicitly says, hey, I am buying Lockheed Martin stock solely because of the classified defense briefing I just left.
Which they are never going to write down.
Exactly. Proving illegal intent is nearly impossible. They can just claim they read a geopolitical analysis in the Wall Street Journal like any other civilian.
Yeah, the burden of proof for insider trading requires establishing that the confidential information was the primary catalyst for the trade.
And the Stock Act didn't change that fundamental burden of proof. It just added a reporting requirement. So while the behavior is legally permissible, the public perception is incredibly hostile.
Oh, for sure. The University of Maryland data in our sources shows that 86% of Americans want a total outright ban on congressional stock trading.
It is one of the rare issues that unifies almost the entire electorate.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the system tolerates everyday greed with a $200 fine, and proving intent is basically impossible on a normal Tuesday, what happens when a global crisis hits?
Yeah, what happens when a lawmaker makes an undeniably massive, perfectly timed trade right before a catastrophe?
Right, we are talking about the ultimate stress test for this legal framework.
And the COVID-19 market crash in early 2020 provides that exact stress test.
Yes, the case of Senator Richard Burr.
Mm-hmm.
In early 2020, Burr was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He is getting the absolute most sensitive, terrifying early briefings on this novel coronavirus before the general public really comprehends the scale of what is coming.
Right.
And right before the market completely crashes, he liquidates a massive portion of his portfolio.
The financial tracking placed the sell-off between $628,000 and $1.7 million in stock.
Wow. And the timing was so flawless that it triggered massive public outrage. I mean, he had to step down from his position as committee chair.
Yeah, the Department of Justice launched a formal investigation. The FBI literally served a search warrant on a sitting United States senator and seized his personal cell phone.
Which is a huge deal.
It is massive. Serving a warrant of that magnitude on a sitting senator requires signing off at the absolute highest levels of the Justice Department. It indicates the investigators believed they had substantial probable cause.
But wait, if the FBI seizes your phone because your trade looks that incredibly suspicious, how on earth do you walk away completely free?
Well, that's the thing.
Because that's the outcome here. 0 criminal charges. He was entirely cleared. In fact, our source notes that no lawmaker has ever been criminally convicted for insider trading under these laws.
They walk away because of the ultimate legal armor that lawmakers wear, which actually dates back to the very founding of the country.
Okay, explain that.
When Burr's legal team responded, their primary defense was plausible deniability. They basically asserted that he traded based on public CNBC and CNN reports about the virus in Asia, not classified intelligence.
Right.
But the real shield, the mechanism that stops prosecutors in their tracks, is found in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. It is called the Speech or Debate Clause.
Okay, I have always heard of the speech or debate clause in the context of protecting politicians from being sued for defamation, for things they say during a fiery speech on the Senate floor.
Exactly, and the historical context of the clause is vital here. The framers of the Constitution borrowed it from the British Bill of Rights of 1689.
Okay, going way back.
Yeah, back then, the King of England would literally arrest members of Parliament who spoke out against the crown or tried to pass laws the king didn't like. So the clause was designed to protect the legislative branch from being intimidated or prosecuted by a tyrannical executive branch.
Right. It ensures lawmakers can debate access information, and vote freely without fear of arrest.
Exactly.
I mean, I get the 17th century intent, but how does that 300-year-old protection for free speech apply to a modern stock portfolio?
Well, in modern jurisprudence, the courts have interpreted the speech or debate clause to protect almost all deliberative work of a lawmaker.
Deliberative work.
Yeah. Senators and their lawyers argue that consuming confidential information, reviewing documents, and attending classified briefings are fundamental parts of their official legislative duty. It is their deliberative work.
So the jury literally never sees the classified briefing documents.
You don't, because a prosecutor legally cannot enter them into evidence.
That is wild.
Yeah, if a prosecutor wants to convict a senator of insider trading, they have to prove the trade was based on specific non-public information.
Right.
But the moment the prosecutor tries to introduce the classified briefing notes to the jury to prove what the senator knew, the senator's defense attorney files a motion citing the speech or debate clause.
And they argue that you cannot use my client's constitutionally protected legislative acts as evidence of a crime.
Exactly. And the judge has to strike it. The prosecutor is left holding a suspicious stock trade with zero underlying evidence to show the jury the catalyst. It creates an almost impenetrable courtroom barrier.
It is an absolute constitutional force field. And it perfectly explains why time and time again, these high-profile investigations quietly close months later without a single criminal charge.
Yeah, the prosecutors realize they just don't have a case they can legally present in a courtroom.
Okay, so we've seen the velvet glove treatment for the lawmakers. Let's pivot to scene B. Let's take that exact same behavior, the exact same use of classified information, and apply it to the military.
Right. The military operates under an entirely different, incredibly punitive legal reality.
Because they are governed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Title 18, Section 1905 of the U.S. Code.
Exactly. Under that section, if an official in the executive branch, which includes the entire military structure, uses confidential information gathered in their official capacity for personal financial gain, the penalties are severe and immediate.
They don't get to wave a constitutional wand and claim deliberative work.
Absolutely not. They face immediate termination, massive financial penalties, and up to a year in federal prison per offense. The standard for prosecuting a military officer is remarkably straightforward compared to a member of Congress.
Wait, but Congress holds the purse strings? They literally authorize the military budgets.
Yes, they do.
How is a general buying Lockheed stock a conflict of interest that warrants federal prison, but the senator who literally writes the check to Lockheed isn't facing a conflict of interest?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the foundational structural rationale for treating these two groups so radically differently comes down to a theoretical interpretation of the separation of powers.
Okay, break that down.
Well, the military operates under the executive branch. Their constitutional job is to execute the laws and policies of the government. The legal theory argues that if an executive branch official, like a general, who knows a specific defense contractor is about to win a massive bid, buys stock in that company, it inherently corrupts the chain of command.
Right. It creates a direct, tangible conflict in the execution of their daily duties, compromising the integrity of the military.
Exactly.
And the legislative branch gets a pass because they write the laws, not execute them.
Essentially, yes. The founders believed legislators needed unrestricted access to all available information to draft informed legislation.
And theoretically, their accountability isn't supposed to come from the criminal justice system?
Right. It is supposed to come from electoral accountability. The logic goes, if the public thinks a senator is corrupt or trading on inside information, the public have the ultimate power to vote them out of office.
But come on, that electoral accountability argument feels incredibly hollow.
Oh, completely.
I mean, our sources point out the reality of modern elections. Congressional terms are long, 6 years for a senator.
Yeah.
By the time an election rolls around, the public has usually forgotten about a suspicious stock trade made 3 years prior during a news cycle that has long since passed.
And the structural realities of incumbency completely undermine the electoral accountability theory anyway. Incumbents hold immense institutional power.
Right, overwhelming fundraising advantages
Uh,
and systemic name recognition.
Exactly. The supposed threat of being voted out doesn't practically stop them from speculating with impunity. It is a staggering double standard. Just the appearance of a conflict of interest is enough to end a military officer's career and put them in a courtroom. But an actual glaring, financially lucrative conflict of interest in Congress, it's just brushed off as a byproduct of a free market system.
So, a soldier can go to federal prison for stealing a pencil from the Pentagon. But a congressperson can turn a classified war briefing into a private fortune, and the worst punishment they get is a slightly uncomfortable CNN interview.
Yeah, that's pretty much the reality of it.
So, what does this all mean? We have a system where criminal convictions are effectively impossible, where the military is held to a vastly different standard, and where public trust is hovering at an all-time low. Is there any actual movement to fix this, or are we just staring at a permanent reality?
Well, the sources indicate there is a massive legislative push currently underway. The year 2025 has generated a unique political pressure cooker.
Right, resulting in 25 active bills circulating in Congress specifically designed to close this loophole.
Exactly. 25 different bills trying to tackle the same issue shows just how loud the public demand has gotten.
The most famous of these bills is the Restore Trust in Congress Act.
Yes.
Although, as our analysis points out, the media and public have ironically dubbed it the Pelosi Act, referencing the highly publicized and incredibly lucrative stock returns of the former speaker's husband over the past decade.
Right. The proposed legislation in the Pelosi Act, and several others like it, attempts to introduce the teeth that the 2012 Stock Act lacked. First, it proposes a total outright ban on individual stock ownership for lawmakers, their spouses, and their dependent children.
Okay, an outright ban is a massive escalation from a 45-day reporting rule.
It is. It also mandates strict divestment. If a lawmaker holds individual stocks when they take office, they are given 180 days to liquidate those positions.
And they have to move those assets somewhere else, right?
Yeah, they're required to move those assets into either broad index funds or blind trusts.
But even with a blind trust, there is nuance there, right? I was reading about the behavioral economics of this in the source material.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
If a lawmaker transfers a portfolio heavily weighted in pharmaceutical stocks into a blind trust, they might not know the exact daily trades the trustee is making.
Right.
But they still inherently know their overall wealth is tied to the success of the biotech sector. So when they vote on FDA regulations, that underlying conflict still exists in the back of their mind.
That is a very sophisticated critique of blind trusts. And it's why many ethics watchdogs argue that broad index funds are the only true way to remove the conflict.
Because with an index fund, your wealth is simply tied to the health of the entire national economy.
Exactly. To enforce this, the new bills completely revamped the penalty structure. Instead of a $200 administrative fine, the proposed penalty is the greater of either $1,000 or 100% of the profits gained from the illegal trade.
Wait, so if a lawmaker makes $2 million off a shady, well-timed trade, the federal government seizes the entire $2 million.
That's the idea. It surgically removes the financial incentive.
That sounds great on paper, but I have to ask the ultimate cynical question. Who puts the bell on the cat?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we possibly expect the exact people who are currently benefiting from this system, who are generating massive legal wealth from this setup, to vote to shut off their own money printer?
This raises an important question, and it represents the central paradox of any congressional reform. The rule makers are the rule breakers. These bills have been drafted, proposed, heavily debated, and systematically stalled for years. Why? Because the very people sitting on the committees deciding whether these bills ever make it to the floor for a public vote are the same people whose personal portfolios have been beating the market for decades.
It is incredibly frustrating.
It is. From an objective structural standpoint, enforcing broad index funds is the only mathematical way to sever the tie between insider legislative knowledge and personal financial gain.
But getting a legislative body to voluntarily surrender an incredibly lucrative privilege requires an overwhelming, sustained level of public pressure that threatens their actual hold on power.
Right.
It's like asking turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, pretty much.
It puts the burden of action entirely back on the public.
Right.
Which brings this right to your doorstep, to you listening right now. If you want to see exactly how this double standard is playing out in your specific district, our source material mentions some incredibly powerful public tracking tool.
Websites like Unusual Whales or Capital Trades.
Yes, they literally aggregate and track the stock portfolios of every member of Congress. I highly recommend looking up your local representatives. Look at their historical returns.
Yeah, it's very revealing.
Because if your representative is consistently beating the S&P 500 year after year after year, well, as our research points out, there's about a 90% chance it's not because they're a secret Wall Street financial genius.
No, it's because they are reading classified reports and acting on them.
Exactly.
But as we consider the push for these reforms, there is one final philosophical dilemma drawn from the research that we haven't touched on yet, but it requires serious critical thought.
Okay, lay it on us.
Let's say the public pressure works. Let's say we pass the Restore Trust in Congress Act and successfully ban politicians from investing and generating legal wealth in the stock market. Where do we draw the line, and what are the unintended consequences?
Unintended consequences like what?
Well, if we dictate that a public servant cannot legally grow their wealth through standard investments, do we risk turning Congress into an exclusive club?
An exclusive club.
Yeah, a place where only the already wealthy elite, people who are already billionaires and don't need the stock market to secure their family's future, can afford to serve. We might inadvertently filter out middle-class citizens from running for federal office.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that.
Or, perhaps even more dangerously, look at the psychological reality of human nature. If we mandate that public servants stay relatively financially restricted while they're actively managing and regulating a $25 trillion national economy,
Right.
do we inadvertently push them away from legal market speculation and toward actual, hard, under-the-table corruption? If you cap their legal upside, do you create a system that invites dark money, foreign bribery, and kickbacks?
That is a really dark thought.
It is a deeply delicate balance between demanding ethical purity and understanding the complex realities of human greed and power.
That is a deeply unsettling dilemma to leave off on, but it is a vital one to chew on. We want to clean up the system, but we have to be incredibly careful that we don't accidentally design a framework that just pushes the worst behavior into the shadows where we can't track it at all.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining me on this custom deep dive. The truth about how our laws are applied or not applied can be incredibly frustrating. But understanding the actual courtroom mechanics, understanding the history of the Constitution, and understanding exactly why the senator walks away with a $200 fine while the Pentagon colonel goes to federal prison, that understanding is the ultimate power.
It really is.
Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and keep demanding better.